Hello guys, I'm John, I'm the Geeky Fanboy, and we're a bit late on this, because last week was Asexual Awareness Week, so I thought, why not take a look at some asexual characters in media, because there aren't many, and the ones we will encounter aren't even like canonically confirmed to be asexual, but I just did a Google search and we're just gonna go through some of the highest ranked asexual characters in like mostly TV shows, I think. So yeah, if you couldn't tell, I'm asexual myself. I got the flag right here, and we all crave representation, don't we? So I thought we were gonna take a look at some of the characters, and I tell you my thoughts on them. So the characters we encounter here are not all of them on the website. I just went with those that I have at least heard about. Some of them I only know like superficially because I haven't seen the movie or the show they're from, but I have at least heard of them. Some of them I do actually know because I watched the whole show. So yeah, I'm just gonna give you like some general thoughts on the characters. So let's go. Okay, so the first character we have here is actually probably my favorite confirmed asexual character. It's Todd from BoJack Horseman. To read a little blurb here, like Todd Chavez revealed to his friend Emily during BoJack Horseman's third season finale that he was confused about his sexual orientation. He told her, "I'm not gay. I mean, I don't think I am, but I don't think I'm straight either. I don't know what I am. I think I might be nothing." During the Netflix show's fourth season, Todd admitted that he was asexual, saying, "It actually feels nice to actually say it out loud. I'm an asexual person. I'm asexual. It feels good to talk about it." Todd's asexuality became a focal point for his character development throughout the fourth season. Once he was willing to label himself asexual, he began to attend asexual meeting groups, which allowed viewers to see the various ways asexual people identify and approach romance and sex. So yeah, Todd is probably the best representation for an asexual character you can get. He is confirmed. He has like a whole coming out thing about it, how he realized that he's asexual. I watched BoJack Horseman, like the complete show, for the first time last year, just as the last season was about to come out, and I did not expect this from this show at all. Like when I started watching it, I was like, okay, so this is like an adult humor cartoon show, maybe a bit like South Park. I didn't really know what to expect from this. Well, turns out BoJack Horseman is one of the best shows I've ever seen. Like it's amazing in terms of like character development and how it looks at mental health, mental illness, depression, anxiety, and all of that stuff. And I did not expect them to actually also take a look at like queerness and especially asexuality, especially with a character like Todd, since when the show starts out, you think, okay, Todd is just like, the dumb best friend of the main character. But there's a lot more going on with this character, I think. And when he got like this little subplot with him, realize, okay, he's in a relationship, but he doesn't quite know how to feel about it. I was honestly happily surprised by what was going on. And when he actually has this coming out, I think it's an amazing scene. And they also have a bit of fun with it, like when he goes to the asexual group meetings, you have like asexual creatures there, like amoebas and other animals and living creatures that produce asexually or are just in general perceived as being asexual. So there's also a little bit of a joke there as well, which I think is nice. Um, and what I think is even better is that they show that being asexual doesn't necessarily mean that you don't want to be in a relationship or that you can't fall in love, because Todd does actually have several relationships throughout the show, and he eventually also has a relationship with another person who's also asexual, who is, funnily enough, I think a rabbit, and they have a lot of fun with her being a rabbit, and rabbits being famously known for having lots of sex and lots of children, and they do play around with that, which I think is really really funny. And the way they show that this is a relationship that still works despite neither characters being into sex of any kind, I think that's great, because even when you do get confirmed asexual characters, a lot of times there's this emphasis on they just don't want sex, they hate sex, it could never ever happen, or there couldn't be like a positive, nice, healthy relationship. And so I think Todd is the best asexual representation you can probably get, where it's super accurate. They get it down. They know what it means, and they don't make fun of it. They explain it to the audience in an understandable and not at all demeaning way. So yeah, if you're craving that asexual representation, definitely go and watch BoJack Horseman, because Todd is the best thing people like us could hope for. Okay, so next up is a character from Game of Thrones. It's Lord Varys. And to read what it says, Game of Thrones is one of the most sexed up programs on television. Yeah, when I started watching that show, boy, was I uncomfortable. Well, Lord Varys is on the show engage in sexual activity and appear to have a desire for physical intimacy. However, Varys seems completely uninterested in sex. During one episode, Oberyn asks Varys if he likes boys or girls. Varys replies he has no interest in either. It notes, when I see what desire does to people, what it's done to this country, I'm very glad to have no part in it. While Varys' asexuality could easily be attributed to him being an Oinuk, it makes clear several times his lack of desire predates his castration. So with Varys, it didn't really click with me at first. He is, yeah, basically asexual, because yeah, for me, a lot of times I was like, oh yeah, because he is an Oinuk, he can't really have sex, so that doesn't really interest him. But his asexuality isn't really like a defining part of his character, and I think we also see this with later characters that are coming up here. I think this falls a bit into the trope of very smart and calculating characters being asexual because they're just so smart and above everything else that they don't even want to waste time thinking about sex because it would distract them, or they don't have time for it. And I think Varys maybe falls into that cliche a bit, with him saying, when I see what it's done to people, what it can do to people, I'm glad that I am able to, ignore that, because my intellect stands above being sexually attracted to people. So I don't really know how to feel about his character in that regard, because that isn't really a defining part of his character, and a lot of times he even gets made fun of for being an Oinuk, which we especially also see later with Tyrion making fun of that a lot, which was absolute bollocks. So I can't really say a lot about Lord Varys. I think it would have been interesting to have a character that doesn't fall into this, super high intellect cliche and still being asexual, especially in a show like Game of Thrones. I think that would have been um, quite interesting, since, like it says here, that it is a very sexed up program. So I think it would have been interesting to have an asexual character in a show like that. I always thought, or at least I liked the idea of oh, why can't I remember her name? Arya. Of Arya being asexual, I thought that would have been an interesting idea, even though it also sort of slides a bit into cliches. But then they came up with this super weird sex scene in the last season with Gendry, which was super awkward. So yeah, that didn't happen. In general, I think more queer representation in a show like Game of Thrones would have been great. We got like a little bit of gay representation, but not a whole lot, and then the gay characters die, and it's Game of Thrones, we all know how it ended. It's not great. So yeah, Lord Varys maybe not the best representation for asexual characters. Okay, so the next character is someone I have heard of, but I have not read the comics or the show he appears in, namely Jughead Jones. So he's from the Archie comics, but I think at this point, he's more famously known from the show Riverdale. And it says here, since the Archie comics first began circulating in the 1940s, there's been speculation about Jughead Jones's possible asexuality. In the 2015 reboot, his asexuality was confirmed in a comic strip. Another character refers to Jughead as asexual, and Jughead does not object to this classification. Jughead then goes on to talk a bit about how his lack of sexual desire shapes his view of the world. In the CW series Riverdale, however, Jughead is not depicted as asexual. Yes, so that is what I do know about the character, that he is not depicted as being asexual in the show, which I think is an absolute shame, and once again, like, erasure of queer representation, especially asexual people, since there are a lot of characters, especially like from literature or comic books, that can very clearly be read or interpreted as being asexual when they do get adapted like on screen, that almost never makes it into the adaptation. And I have heard that I think it is a general complaint within the fandom of like Riverdale, the Archie comics, that Jughead is not represented as being asexual. Since, as far as I know, since I don't know, I haven't really engaged with the show or the comics, but I think Jughead is one of the more popular characters on Riverdale, so I think it would have been great to have a character like that, also a character who's been around since the 1940s, be there and being asexual, especially since the show like Riverdale is targeted towards younger people and teenage audiences. I think it would have been great to have a character like that, to show the young people, yes, asexuality is a thing, even when you're a teenager, and there's nothing wrong with you. I think that would have been great, but alas, Riverdale did not go there, and I think this is one of many examples for asexuality erasure, because I guess the media thinks asexuality either doesn't exist or is boring for some reason. I don't know, but it's not great. Okay, so here is one of my former favorite fictional characters, Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory, played by the wonderful Jim Parsons. I absolutely love Jim Parsons, so in case you didn't know, let's just read what it says here. For several seasons of The Big Bang Theory, Sheldon Cooper showed zero interest in sex. His sexuality is still up for debate amongst fans, with some classifying him as a late bloomer in terms of sex and romance, and others classifying him as falling under the asexual umbrella. Even when Sheldon started dating Amy, there was no rush to be intimate, and he even mentioned that a physical relationship was unlikely when they first got together. In addition to seeming to lack sexual desire, Sheldon also seemed largely aromantic. While he and Amy cared for each other, their relationship was not traditionally romantic and seemed more based on an intellectual connection. Eventually, after many years together, the pair decided to make love. But does that change the fact that Sheldon is most likely asexual? Well, it's complicated. As asexuality exists on the spectrum, there is an argument to be made that Sheldon is still asexual. Many asexual people do have and enjoy sex on occasion, albeit their feelings surrounding sex and intimacy may differ from the feelings of non-asexual people. So, I was a huge fan of Big Bang Theory back in the day, but I eventually stopped watching when, I don't even really know when, but when the whole relationship stuff started taking over, especially like in regards to Sheldon and Amy, a couple that I initially enjoyed in the beginning because I thought it was cute, since Sheldon, like it says here, was usually quite removed from being romantically engaged, let alone sexually involved with anyone. So I thought it was quite cute that he found someone who was very similar to him and who he was able to relate to, and have someone who also finds him interesting as he is. So I thought that was quite cute to have Amy being there to sort of confirm, okay, Sheldon is not abnormal in that regard. There are other people like him, and he's able to form friendships or relationships with those kinds of people. I thought that was really cool in the beginning, but then as the show continued, for me, this whole relationship stuff started taking over anyway, and I caught up to the fact that the geeky humor in The Big Bang Theory isn't really all that great, and I didn't like that they were slowly but steadily moving the Sheldon-Amy relationship towards a more mainstream kind of relationship, and this is why I stopped watching. But I sort of kept an eye on the show, and watched an episode now and then. And I do remember this being a big thing when it was announced. Oh, there's going to be an episode where Sheldon and Amy are finally going to have sex, and I did watch that show and the clip and everything, and for some reason it didn't sit quite right with me because it felt like the show is erasing the asexuality that was surrounding Sheldon's character. It is important to point out, just like the text says here, that asexual people, or some asexual people, do still have sex, or do still enjoy sex for various reasons. That is important, of course, and those people exist and they're valid. However, what I think is the problem in regards to the show is that the show is very clearly pushing for a sort of character development thing when Sheldon and Amy finally have sex, as if this is something Sheldon and Amy, to a certain degree as well, have to learn or overcome in order to become more of a regular, normal couple. You know what I mean? Since Sheldon is always presented as being very abnormal and completely like disconnected from his group of friends, especially in regards to like friendships and relationships and romance. When he enters this relationship with Amy, it's all kind of nice in the beginning, but it sort of moves towards this development of Sheldon has to unlearn his previous behavior or previous character traits in order to understand what proper normal relationships are like, and that involves eventually having sex at some point. So this is why I had a problem with that, because I thought the show took away what made Sheldon special in that regard. Because, they could have still had Sheldon maybe trying out sex with Amy, and then maybe realizing, okay, yeah, it really is not my thing. I was willing to try it with you because I like you and I care about you, but it's just not my thing. But that's not, as far as I know, that's not really what they do. As far as I remember, in the episode where they do have sex for the first time, it's like a joke where it says several hours later or something. Then it's the two of them smiling in bed, and I thought, come on, it's totally exaggerated. So yeah, I think the show was trying to do something there, I think, but it didn't really work quite in the right way. In general, the whole relationship stuff in The Big Bang Theory isn't that great anyway. But I think especially with Sheldon, I was very sad to see how his development as a character was going, since they sort of use him as this character who's odd and quirky and very different from everyone else, and he has to overcome those things, where the show sort of presents being in a quote unquote mainstream normal relationship is the desirable outcome for you. So this is why this didn't really sit quite right with me, what the show did there. Even though I really like Sheldon as a character, he was my favorite on The Big Bang Theory. And like I said, Jim Parsons is a wonderful actor. I really do like him a lot. But like the text says here, it's up for debate. I really like to see Sheldon as an asexual, and maybe to a certain degree even like a romantic character. Maybe he's like demi-romantic, I could see that. But I think the show made a couple of mistakes where you can definitely interpret this in very different ways that are not always positive. We come to another one of my favorite fictional characters, namely the Doctor from Doctor Who. And I have to admit, I never really actually thought about the Doctor maybe being asexual, so let's see what it says here. There have been many different incarnations of the Doctor from Doctor Who, a character that has spanned over 26 TV seasons and 2 feature films. Additionally, several different actors have played the popular British role. The time-travelling Doctor did not display any sexual interest until his 8th incarnation, and suddenly experienced the excitement of being close to someone. Doctor Who admitted that was the first time he ever had that feeling of romance. Doctor Who's had a couple of different romantic interests like Rose Tyler and River Song. There have also been hints that some of his incarnations have been sexually attracted to men. However, even though he was married to River Song, he admitted that he had no idea if he was actually attracted to her, so most fans classify the Doctor as falling somewhere along the spectrum of asexuality. So I think that's quite interesting, because I would absolutely love it if the Doctor was like canonically portrayed as asexual, because I think that would make a lot of sense. They just don't have that, that vibe that they would be a very sexual person. Or at least to me, it always seemed weird when the Doctor was put in sexual situations. Like, when River Song is like flirting with him very, very aggressively. Or, I think we get this especially a lot in the David Tennant and Matt Smith era, where it always feels a little awkward, I think, when the Doctor is put in those kinds of situations. And I mean, the text is absolutely right. The Doctor didn't really express any kind of romantic or sexual interest in anyone until the first film, which I actually recently rewatched the other day. And the Eighth Doctor kisses Grace in that film, who's the companion for that story. Even though I didn't really see that as like a sexual thing that's happening, since he's kind of like really getting excited in the moment, and he's really happy, and Grace is there, and she's sort of getting caught up in the excitement as well. And he sees her, and he clearly likes her, and he just like gives her a big smooch, and both people like it. But the film sort of plays it off as being, they really like each other and they care for each other, but it's not necessarily like a super serious romantic or even sexual thing. It's just like, the Doctor being excited and finding someone who he can relate to and who he really likes, and Grace also finding someone who she can relate to, especially after her last boyfriend was a complete twat. But at the end of the film, it's like we're two different. Like, you're an alien who travels through time and space, and I'm a doctor from the year 2000 or 1999, and I can't really deal with the whole time travel thing. So we have to part ways, and that's it. There are no bad feelings about it, which I actually really liked. So since the 2005 reboot, I think it's interesting because the Ninth Doctor definitely is not connotated as being a very sexual person, I think. So like, he does get his smooches in towards the end of series 1, but I think also it's for the Ninth Doctor, it's also a bit more of a quirk, like when he and Rose dance together. I think it's really sweet. And we have him getting kissed by Captain Jack Harkness when he says goodbye, which is not a sexual thing at all. It's just like, a thing Captain Jack does. He like gives Rose a kiss of goodbye, and the Doctor a kiss of goodbye, and that's it. Like, there's not really any sexual romantic connotation to it, I think. And then the Ninth Doctor like kisses Rose to save her. That, I think, does have a romantic connotation. And that, I think, it's heavily picked up with the 10th Doctor. So there's definitely a relationship going on between the 10th Doctor and Rose Tyler. Like, that's out of the question. Since, the show also really liked to play up that David Tennant was, a bit of a pretty boy. And I mean, he still is, let's be honest. So the show liked to lean in on that. Also with Matt Smith a bit as well, especially like in regards to River Song and everything. I'm not quite sure if I remember this correctly, but I think Matt Smith said in an interview once that he thinks the Doctor, or at least his Doctor, is asexual, which I thought was actually quite interesting. So I always thought, like, when I initially started watching the show, I thought the Doctor would be like pansexual, like the Doctor just doesn't care about who you are, what you are. Like, they would just love you regardless of alien, human, gender, whatever. But since the show doesn't really lean in on romance or sex for that matter that much, which I guess is also due to the show trying to be like family friendly, I think you could definitely interpret the Doctor as being asexual. I could definitely see the current Doctor, Jodie Whittaker, being asexual. I think she like fits that very well, that label, I think. I mean, with the Doctor, it's up for debate. I think you can ascribe almost any kind of label to the Doctor in regards to like sexuality and gender, especially since the Doctor has switched genders as well. So there's a whole lot going on there, and like, I've never really thought about the Doctor maybe being asexual, but I do quite like the thought. And, you know, I think it also always depends on what kind of Doctor you're watching, since I think that is something that changes from incarnation to incarnation, how the Doctor perceives themselves in terms of like gender and in terms of sexuality and romantic relationships. So, like for example, the 10th Doctor would maybe be very attracted to Rose Tyler, either romantically and or sexually, however you want to see that. But you know, the 12th Doctor maybe wouldn't. Like he would maybe care for Rose because he remembers her, but he would maybe not be like romantically or sexually attracted to her. So I think that changes a lot, and it's open for interpretation, which I quite like. So this is another famous character, but I don't actually really know that much about him. Dexter Morgan from the. I only really know the Dexter TV series, but apparently there's also a book series, which I didn't know. I have only seen like a couple of episodes from the very first season of Dexter, so not more than that. And I know that the show had quite an infamous ending, but you know, I know it's about a serial killer, so that's good. So let's see what's that. Dexter Morgan lives his life with a single purpose. He's a serial killer who only kills murderers who get away with their crimes. Dexter eventually gets married and has a son, but his relationship with his wife Rita is not very sexual in nature. In earlier seasons of the show, Dexter expressed disdain and disgust for all things sexual. In the books the series is based on, his character is portrayed as completely asexual, only feigning interest in sex to maintain his masquerade of normalcy. In the show, however, Dexter's sexuality is a subject of debate. While initially shown as entirely asexual, in later seasons the series hints his lack of desire is more due to sexual repression than his inherent sexuality. So this is also something that was like my impression from the couple of episodes I have seen, that Dexter isn't necessarily asexual just because he is asexual, but again, it's more like him because he's sort of a psychopath, I guess, or sociopath or whatever. I mean, he has some issues, definitely. That this is something that's more connected to that, or this is something he also represses because it gets in the way of his other stuff, or he doesn't allow himself to be sexually attracted to people. This is also what I initially perceived while watching the show. What I think is interesting, though, that it says here that in the books he is completely asexual, and in the show it's more ambiguous. Which once again, it's like with Jughead. It's something where from in the original it's very clearly stated, but then as soon as it gets adapted, there is this sort of erasure, and there's more ambiguity, since I don't know, I guess being asexual is not relatable, but having him be a serial killer, the entire premise of the show, is not a problem at all. But I don't know. So I think it would be interesting. I know that the show has quite a big and active fan, and a lot of people like the show and the character. So maybe if you like, what are your thoughts on it? Put it down in the comments below, because I would really love to know. And who knows, maybe I'll get back into the show. I think it would be quite interesting to see where the show goes with this, with his character in regards to sexuality. But also, again, I think it falls a bit into like this cliche sort of stuff where we have someone who's not really quite normal. We have someone who isn't quite right in the head. We have someone um, who is a serial killer in this case, and it's like, like the text says, maybe he represses something, or he stands above sexual attraction, where he says, I don't really have time for this, or I don't allow myself to be sexually attracted because it stands in the way of me being a serial killer, or I might hurt people, or something like that. So this is more something that he does by choice and not something that he just is. At least that would be my perception of it. I don't know. Like I said, I haven't really watched the show, so do tell me in the comments below what you think. So here we have another rather famous character. It's Daryl Dixon from The Walking Dead. Again, I haven't really seen that much of The Walking Dead. I watched the first 2 seasons and then stopped watching because I thought the show was boring. But yeah, I've heard a lot about Daryl Dixon. I had a friend at the time who told me, oh, Daryl might be asexual. That's kind of interesting. So yeah. So even in the horror of the zombie apocalypse, people still seem to find love. Rick and Michonne appear perfectly happy together, and Glenn even got married. However, Daryl has never looked twice at another person with even a hint of romantic interest. The show's creator Robert Kirkman did label Daryl as somewhat asexual, but he has not necessarily ruled out a love interest for Dixon in the future. However, asexuality does exist on the spectrum, so Daryl could still identify with the label, even if he were to have a love interest in future seasons. As far as I know, there are like maybe 2 potential love interests for him throughout the show, like 2 women that he occasionally gets shipped with, I think, as far as I know. But yeah, like the blurb says here, nothing really happens. I think it would be quite interesting to have one of the, leading characters of The Walking Dead be asexual. But then again, Daryl, at least to me, seems like the kind of character who just doesn't have the time, to be sexually interested in someone, especially since it's the apocalypse, I think it would be quite cool since he is one of the most popular and famous characters from the show, and he would definitely go against, I guess, like the cliche depiction of an asexual person, since he seems to, at first glance, be like this very typical incarnation of manly masculinity. You know what I mean? But then he's completely disinterested in sex and stuff like that. That would, I think, be quite interesting. I think you can interpret the character that way, at least from what I've seen. But then again, I think it's just this kind of character who hasn't really gotten, the character arc that involves maybe potential relationships, or him being in a situation where sex or romance could occur. So I guess there are a lot of open interpretations to his character. Okay, so here we go. One of my other favorite fictional characters of all time. It is your boy Hannibal Lecter. So yeah, they show here the picture from the show Hannibal with Mads Mikkelsen. Obviously, the Hannibal originated in the books, so Red Dragon, Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal Rising, and then of course also the movies. So I've read and seen everything that has Hannibal Lecter in it. I first read the books, then I saw all the Anthony Hopkins films, then I also watched, what's the other film from the 80s called? Headhunter, I think. I watched that one, and then I found out about the show. So I've seen everything. And yeah, like the blurb says here, Hannibal Lecter's sexuality is depicted in a variety of ways, but often borders on asexual. On the television show Hannibal, the titular cannibal serial killer is depicted as being asexual, mostly due to his sociopathic nature and interest in killing and bloodshed over anything else. In the series by Thomas Harris, Hannibal seems asexual in Silence of the Lambs, and the desire to kill seems to override the desire for sex. However, as the books go on, more and more explanation and backstory is given to Hannibal's nature, and sexual desires do begin to develop. That is actually true, and something I actually kind of liked about, I think it's the 3rd novel, Hannibal, with Mason Verger and Clarice trying to find Hannibal again. And then the end of that novel, they didn't do that in the film, because they changed that. I was really angry with that. In the novel, at the very end, Clarice and Hannibal become a couple. Like, they're really fancy. They go to the opera together. It's really cool. I like it. They might be cannibalistic together. I think that's at least what the book hints at. But yeah, Hannibal and Clarice become a couple, and they, I think it's even mentioned that they have sex on a regular basis. I'm not quite sure. Yeah, the film doesn't do that. They have like a smooch at the end of the film, but Clarice is portrayed being this strong-headed woman who is not willing to go with Hannibal's BS, and Hannibal runs away. Which, I guess I understand that, because, I guess mainstream blockbusters don't really want to portray the leading lady running away with a cannibalistic serial killer and then becoming a couple. I can understand why they changed that, but it was still cool in the book, I thought. And it says here that in the show, so like here with Mads Mikkelsen, that he is mostly portrayed as asexual, which isn't really true. Like, he has sex with women in the show, and it's very, very heavily, not even implied, it even gets like straight up said at some point that Hannibal is in love with Will Graham, and there's a lot of like homosexual connotation going on between the 2 characters. So I wouldn't say that the Hannibal Lecter in the TV show is depicted as being asexual, since he very clearly expresses a certain sense of interest in people, be that romantically or sexually, is, I think, up for debate. You can also debate, especially like in the relationship he has with the women in the show, if he's really serious about them, or if he just does it because it benefits him in that moment, or if he just does it in order to manipulate them, which I think might be especially true in his relationship with Alana Bloom in the show, that he maybe just sort of uses this relationship he has with her in order to manipulate her and to like keep up this facade of him actually being a good guy. It's arguable, I guess, but yeah, like I said, the show straight up says Hannibal Lecter is in love with Will Graham, so that's a thing. So in the novels, they're quite right. There isn't really any existing sexual interest or romantic connotation for Hannibal right up until the Hannibal novel, like I said, where he ends up being in a relationship with Clarice at the end, which I think is quite interesting, because I think also in the films as well, you know, they sometimes speculate if they're like, oh, he's into all this fancy stuff, you think he's gay because he's a cultured man, because I guess that's how you recognize the gays. I don't know. I think that's actually quite interesting. Since Hannibal also goes a lot against like this typical depiction of masculinity, since he's like very fancy and to a certain degree maybe even effeminate, you could argue, and is into all that fancy stuff and so on. So I think that's quite interesting. To me, Hannibal was always bisexual or pansexual. At least that's how I perceived him when I read the novels and also watched the films, because he just seemed like the sort of person who wouldn't care about what gender you are. He would just either tolerate you or eat you, I guess. I do admit that, you know, it doesn't seem like sex is something he's very occupied with. So I would argue that he probably has a very low like sex drive or something. So in that regard, he could be considered as being asexual, maybe grey ace or something like that. I could definitely see that from his character. But I do think there is a certain degree of sexual attraction he does feel for people, especially if he's able to appreciate them on like a personal relationship, romantic, intimate level, which I think for him comes first. I think for Hannibal, this platonic or romantic level is a lot more important than the sexual level. But then again, it's also important to point out, you know, he is to a certain degree a sociopath or psychopath. So, which again sort of maybe plays a bit into this cliche we also had with Dexter. This is just something he doesn't really think about, or you know, because he's so occupied with other things, or he's so mentally different from everyone else, that this isn't really something that occupies his mind. So I don't know, like to me, Hannibal Lecter is bisexual, but I could definitely see maybe an ace connotation somewhere in there where he isn't like this isn't something that like primarily occupies him when he enters relationships or friendships with people. And lastly, it's a boy, Sherlock Holmes. Well, I just made a video essay saying that Sherlock Holmes is asexual and aromantic, so I don't even think this stands for discussion. But, you know, let's read it anyway. Sherlock Holmes as a character has appeared in movies, television, and books. His sexual nature has varied a lot from source to source. In one of the latest adaptations, the BBC series Sherlock, starring Benedict Cumberbatch, the detective is asexual. A lot of people would probably argue against that. However, some may not consider the detective technically asexual, as his lack of a sex life is supposedly the result of a choice rather than an inherent lack of desire. The show's titular star said his detective character has to avoid sexual relationships because they would get in the way of his work. He's asexual for a purpose, not because he doesn't have a sex drive, but because he's supposed to do his work. Cold showers, looking at a lot of dead bodies, they'll do it for you, Cumberbatch explained. Which, you know, Benedict, I love you, but why did you say that? Because again, it sort of plays in this cliche of, Sherlock Holmes is so smart and so preoccupied with other things, primarily his work, that he just simply does not have the time to concern himself with sex or romance of any kind. Which, is a shame, because I think Sherlock Holmes is actually the most famous fictional asexual character. Like, if you read the books, in my opinion, it's very clear that he bears no romantic or sexual interest in anyone. Like, he says so multiple times. He says, I'm not a marrying man. I could not see myself in a relationship ever. I'm happy being on my own. He is happy on his own. The man at the end of the novel is 60 years old, lives in Sussex, and cares about bees. The man is happy being single. So yeah, and to go with like Benedict's version of the character, I always thought the character in the show is very clearly asexual, and also most likely aromantic. However, we all know, the show did like to lean in on, "Ooh, maybe he's gay." We all know that there were many jokes in regards to that, and I think there's also like a really bad quote from Stephen Moffat where he was like, "How asexuality isn't interesting, so we're not doing it," even though he clearly wrote the character as being asexual. I think I remember there's this one scene in, which episode is it? The Abominable Bride, I think, which has like Holmes and Watson having actually this kind of conversation where they talk about like Irene Adler, and Watson asks him, "Did you really never have any sort of interest? You are a human being. You must have urges." And Sherlock is like, "Why are we even talking about this right now?" And I appreciate what they were probably trying to do there, but the scene feels a little wrong. At least when I watch it, I feel like this is the show sort of trying to say, you can't be asexual. Like, you're a human being. You must have urges. It's unthinkable that a person could just not be sexually attracted to someone. It's unthinkable. And a similar scene also comes up in, is it season 4? I'm not quite sure, where Sherlock gets called by Irene again, and Watson is like, "Who keeps calling you? Is it Irene? Go answer the damn phone." Where again you have this insistence from Watson being like, "Go answer the phone. There's a woman that's clearly in love with you. You should be in a relationship, so go answer the phone." Which is sort of the show trying to tell you, this isn't really something normal. Like, Sherlock should go for the relationship if it's offered to him. So why doesn't he do it? So yeah, there's definitely a bit of a problem there in the BBC show, and I love the BBC show daily. I really, really do, but it does have a lot of problems as well. And like the blurb also says here, there are many different kinds of incarnations of the character. Like in the private life of Sherlock Holmes, he's very heavily connotated as probably being gay, or maybe even in a relationship with Watson. Like I said, in the books, or in the Jerry Brett show, I think they like very clearly go with him being asexual, and he's just not interested in people in that way. I think the Robert Downey Jr. Guy Ritchie films are quite interesting, since they do have Sherlock being interested in Irene Adler in that one, and there's also an interview where Robert Downey Jr. said that he doesn't think that Sherlock Holmes is asexual in that regard. But then then those films also lean into like gay connotations, especially in the second film between Holmes and Watson. So there you go. I think there are many different kinds of interpretations I can have with this character. But what I think is a shame that, because in the books it's very heavily implied that he doesn't have any interest in people. Like, if the books were written now, Doyle would have probably used the word asexual. Let's be honest, he just would have, but he just didn't have the words. And I think it's kind of a shame that when a lot of times when the character gets adapted, this either gets completely ignored or it gets completely thrown out of the window, with Sherlock suddenly being interested in characters like Irene Adler for no reason whatsoever. And I think we need more like canon accurate Sherlock Holmes characterizations with the man, if it's like a modern adaptation, clearly saying, I'm not interested in sex, I don't care about relationships in that way. Because it doesn't negate his friendship with Watson or anything, because I do completely understand, especially like also in the BBC show, if you think, Holmes and Watson are in love and there's homosexuality going on there. I completely understand that, especially in the BBC show. I can understand why people read it that way. But I also like the notion that, to me, Holmes and Watson they are clearly in love, but on a platonic level. They are each other's absolute best friend. They care about each other deeply. That's a fact, and I do think they love each other, but not on this romantic asexual level. And I think that's also what we need more, not just in regards to asexual representation, but in general, that deep, caring friendships are a thing. Like, you can love each other without it being romantic and or sexual. I think we need more of that, especially if it's like two men, that they can just be best friends and love each other without everyone saying, oh, it's gay and it's sexual, it's romantic. Because that's not really that's not the point, especially of like the friendship between Holmes and Watson, I think. Okay, so this is the end of this very long and overdue video on asexual characters in media. They were mostly characters from TV shows and films, I know. So if you know any more asexual characters in books, shows, movies, whatever, put them down in the comments below. Representation is important. Asexuality is just as valid as any other sexuality. And yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on the characters above, some of the characters that you might know. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done that already. And I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.